I'm Marian McNamara of the League of Women Voters of Portland, and I'm sitting in for Doreen Binder, our president, who wanted to be here tonight but had the flu and very graciously decided not to share with us. On her behalf, I'd like to welcome you to our 2019 Voter Education Forum. Before we begin our forum, I'd like to acknowledge that we are here on the occupied lands and waters of the indigenous Chinook people. We understand that we will never be as good stewards as they are, but we can try with we can aspire to, with everything that we do, to try to be as good as they were. I would like to take a moment to thank the following supporters of our voter services forums: the Wise Foundation, the Carol and Velma Sailing Foundation, and the Multnomah Bar Foundation. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that works to help citizens make informed choices about elections. We do not endorse candidates or parties. Rather, we want to give voters the information they need to select their own candidates. Membership information about the League of Women Voters is available on our website, lwvpdx.org. Please, if you have not yet registered to vote, the last day to do so is April 30th. You may contact the County Elections Office or register with the Oregon Secretary of State. Ballots will be mailed out beginning on May 1st. Information on all candidates for this election will be available for your viewing at vote411.org, and there's also information at the desk where you came in. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The restrooms are through that back door and to your right. And just as a little audio-visual reminder, please take out your cell phones and make sure they're silenced. Although we want to encourage you to tweet tonight, we do not want to have a lot of rings throughout the presentation. Tonight we have candidates for the Board of Education of Portland Public Schools. As usual, we have invited all candidates who have filed. Two candidates, Carlos Germain Richard and Jeff Sosny, let us know after filing that they had chosen to withdraw from the race and will not be attending tonight. Haley Lowry, who is running for Zone 7, will unfortunately not be able to attend this evening, though in her stead she asked that Jamie Dunphy, a member of her campaign, join us this evening. Jamie, would you please stand up and wave? And thank you for coming. The other 7 candidates are here, and we would like to thank all of you for taking time to join our forum this evening. The League is delighted to partner this evening with the Portland Council PTA and the Bus Project. Lisa Kensell of the Portland Council PTA will do a little introduction, and she will be followed by Maddie Immel of the Bus Project.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Kensell, and I'm a parent of 3 PPS students. I'm the former president of Portland Council, and I'm currently serving as vice president of leadership for Oregon PTA. I'm here tonight to tell you a little bit about Portland Council. Portland Council PTA oversees the 75 PTAs here in the Portland area, providing resources and training and leadership opportunities for those leaders at the PTAs. We also run the Portland Council PTA Clothing Center in conjunction with PPS, held at Marshall campus, and we've assisted over 1,300 PPS students with clothing this school year. We also operate the Student Aid Center, and we provide eyeglasses, shoes, and other clothing items that cannot be found at the clothing center. We're happy tonight to co-host with the League and the Bus Project, and a reminder that the mission of PTA is to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. And we appreciate the fact that you're all here advocating for students in PPS. Thank you.
Hey everyone. How's it going? Are you all excited to be here? Forum, right? Woo! Yay. Well, thank you so much for taking time on a Thursday night to come out and really support students and really our city. My name is Maddie, and I work for the Bus Project, an organization that has been around for 16 years getting young people active in democracy. So we have some students here, Alana from Cleveland. She's representing Cleveland. And we also have a lot of students that are going to be participating on Twitter tonight. They'll be tweeting using the hashtag PPS 2019. It's in front here. So if you don't feel comfortable writing on a card, you want to be a part of the Twitter conversation, we encourage you to hashtag and follow what's going on. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. If you need to register to vote, we have voter registration cards out front. And also, if you're interested in volunteering, let me know, because we do a lot of work getting young people active. We've got a group that is organizing around gun reform issues. We have a group right now of 18 high schools registering their peers and talking about the importance of school boards. And we are also going to be doing get out the vote efforts for the May 21st election. So we'll be phone calling people and just, making sure that they have their ballot, they know what is going on, because a lot of people don't know that there's an election in May, and also hopefully maybe knocking some doors as well. So let me know if you want to get involved, and thanks again.
And thank you for those introductions. Let's get started. As indicated, this is a voter education forum. My name is Linda Mather, and I'm the moderator. Let's do some more housekeeping again very quickly if we could. As indicated, please close all of your electronic devices, and please do not record this session for your own use. Would you also please hold your applause until the end, because that only takes up more time. As time allows in here, we welcome audience questions, and as indicated, we will also be taking questions electronically. But for those of you who are here, you should be able to get 3x5 cards and feel free to ask your questions. Please make them legible so that they can be read by the lovely volunteers behind me, and also hold them up so people can collect them. Page 2. This forum will be available for on-demand viewing from the link of the League of Women Voters Portland, which is LWVPDX, and this session will last approximately 50 minutes. We have 2 panels tonight. First is seated up here already, and that includes all 3 candidates from Zone 3, Wes Soderback, Amy Kohnstamm, and Debbie Mayer. I got that one right. And on the panel also is Robert Schultz from Zone 7. As indicated, his opponent, Ms. Lowry, had a previous commitment and could not join us, but her answers are available on the vote411.org, which you may also want to access for additional information. I will switch the responders for every round, so the candidates take turn answering first. The candidates will have 1.5 minutes for their answers, and they will also have 1 minute for the opening and closing remarks. There's a timekeeper in the front who has nice little paddles that say 15 seconds and stop. And with all of that, I think we're ready to begin. So, Mr. Soderback, would you give us your first opening, please?
I'm Wes Soderback. My family's lived in the area for over 100 years. My parents went to Portland Public Schools. I went to public school, and my brother went to public schools. So I'm pretty familiar with what goes on here. I'm particularly interested in boosting our high school graduation rate. I just spent the last 10 years as a member of the Benson alumni, was on the board for 4 years, and we did the same. Plus, we got a new building. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you first to our friends at the PTA and the League of Women Voters and the Bus Project for bringing us all together tonight and shining a light on these elections. My name is Amy Kohnstamm. I'm a parent of 2 students in PPS and a recent graduate, and I am a graduate of PPS. I have served on the board since 2015, and I'm running again because I believe we're at the beginning of transformation of Portland Public Schools, and I want to continue with the good work we have, particularly addressing the achievement gap for our students and also the historic inequities between our neighborhood schools. I firmly believe that we can't be a thriving city without a strong and equitable public school system, and that means that the education afforded to every child in every neighborhood school is the same opportunity. So I look forward to our conversation tonight. This is a critical moment, I think, for board leadership. We have some serious challenges facing us, including budget challenges, but we also have some incredible opportunities for school improvement and to serve our students better. Thank you so much.
Ms. Mayer.
Okay, I'm Deb Mayer, and I'm running for Portland Public School Board, Zone 3. I'd like to help guide Portland Public Schools in a positive direction. I bring instructional leadership experience and expertise to the board because I am an educator. I feel like now is the time to move toward safer learning environments, richer curricula, creativity, collaboration, and a respect for the teaching profession. We need to recognize also that students can show their intelligence in multiple ways, not just reading and math. And we also need to appreciate diversity and embrace and celebrate the students and families that make up our learning communities. And finally, we need to make fiscally responsible decisions and prioritize funding going to classrooms.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm not a professional politician, so you'll have to bear with me as I kind of work through this whole process. I am a single father of 3. One of my sons was diagnosed with leukemia at age 5 and is doing great now at age 15.
Yeah.
He and his twin brother are both at Franklin High School. It's really a great thing. So with that, I've had experience with the special ed, with the 504 plans, with the IEP plans. I've dealt with the special education system for support of my son, and it's been a battle. In fact, I had to bother some previous school board members to help me in that challenge. I don't feel like the system's working very fairly or reasonably to service people in that lane, and I feel like that touches everyone. I have twins. It affects both of them, and my daughter's a bit behind them. Oh, wow. Sorry, a minute flies, doesn't it? I'm a scoutmaster with a troop that has about 80 kids. I think our schools can do a lot better, and I'm excited to be part of this process. So thanks for bearing with me.
Thank you. Ms. Kohnstamm, the question, first one. The Oregonian reports that the public school expenditure per student expenditures are in the top 20 of large districts in the nation. Why is the ranking on student achievement not correspondingly high, and how will you change that?
That's a great question. So Oregon is about the middle of the pack in terms of our per student allocations, just above the middle of packs nationwide. We're lucky, Portland Public Schools, because we've been able to pass levies that have added teachers. But as has been highlighted lately with the information coming out of the Joint Student Success Committee at the legislature, our challenges are really increasing, that our children are coming into schools with social emotional challenges, a lot of struggles of homelessness and poverty and special needs that need to be addressed in our classroom. And the, just reading, writing, and arithmetic that we used to rely on is not enough to really support our students and help develop them to their full potential. That said, I do believe that there is more we can do to be fiscally responsible and to make sure that our expenditures are really focused on creating a benefit for students in the classroom and supporting our teachers with exactly what they need in terms of being strong instructional leaders and being able to differentiate the needs of every student that shows up in their class. So there is a lot, this is a lot of the work that we are currently undertaking in PPS. How do we look at each child as an individual and determine exactly what they need to succeed?
Thank you. Ms. Mayer?
Well, there are definitely changes that need to be made in the way that money is spent. Of course, kids are coming to school with a lot more challenges, we see, than they did in the past. There's also a lot of societal changes that contribute to how kids are doing in school. But there are a lot of things that we could remedy if we just spent money more wisely. The first thing I would do is trim the administration and look at jobs that aren't directly connected to kids. And I think more resources need to flow to schools in poor neighborhoods and with more challenged students. Also, we need to lower class sizes. That's one of the most effective things in getting higher achievement. We need a librarian at every school. We've cut so many librarians, and they're so valuable to schools. More art, music, PE, and the subjects that make kids want to come to school are needed. We need to spend less money on technology, not more. Money should be spent to make sure that kids are safe at school also, including removing cell towers and routers and purifying drinking water and restoring social restorative justice programs, because these are all things that add to achievement.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz?
Yeah, could you run that one again?
I thought you might. Let's see. The Oregonian reports that expenditures per student are in the top 20 of the large districts in the nation. Why is the ranking on student achievement not correspondingly high, and how would you change that?
I think Portland Public School has a listening problem. It doesn't listen to the right people. When communities of colors are consulted, it's often through the filter of white people. I think that impacts achievement dramatically. I think that when teachers communicate their needs and issues in the classroom, that's what we should be listening to and change our and focus and redirect on. I think that when it's dramatically challenging to get hold of the staff you need to support your child, that is where the problem is. The problem is communicating with our parents, with our resources. At Franklin, the guidance counselor didn't have an office for like his first month. And my kids both had the same guidance counselor, and he was like, oh yeah, so you can kind of find me here and there. That's why we're breaking down the system, frankly, is we're just not communicating well. We're not providing access to the opinions and the data that can support growth in directions that maybe we don't all want, like technologically applying creative solutions to things. I think sometimes there is a need to invest in that arena, but then at other times it doesn't make sense. So that system of judgment is what's broken. And, that's my 2 cents anyway. Okay, Mr.
Soderback.
If I understand the question, it was sort of, we're just not getting the results for the money we spend on the academic side. And that is an easier question to ask than to answer. If we had the answer towards it, we would have the best figures. So what do we do to start looking into this? There was one thing, we're closing schools down, and a guy kept asking me, he says, how much does it cost to put a person through Benson as it does another, Jefferson or Grant? PPS could not even tackle the question. He says, well, we don't figure it out. We get so much ahead for every one that goes to school, and that's how much it costs. So our costs are always going to be 100%. We're always going to spend all our money, whether it's productive or not. We got to spend this money. It's the type of question the Oregonian would ask, knowing that the answer is yet to be found.
Thank you. Next question, and Ms. Mayer, you're going to start us off on, I just lost it. Here we go. What criteria will you use to determine whether and how school boundaries should be redrawn, and how will you engage the community in that process?
Oh, wow.
90 seconds. There you go.
Well, there's been so much talk about this already, and so many people have so many different opinions, and it's important to get input from everyone. But instead of changing boundaries, we might want to look into some other ways that we could give an equitable education to kids across the city. So I'm not sure that boundaries are really the right way to approach this learning situation. I know neighborhood schools are important to people, but also if you adhere to that model, then you are sometimes limiting the opportunities that kids have who come from poorer neighborhoods, for instance. So I think there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into this question, and it's really not just a matter of changing boundaries. And I think that's a question that's going to take a lot more than 90 seconds to answer.
Mr. Schultz?
I'm kind of a short answer guy, sorry. The boundaries being redrawn does not change the product of our system. So I don't see the value of shuffling everything. Charter schools, most of them that I know of, are flush with people wanting to come into their programs. So I don't think that is a boundary issue. Good schools have a vetting process now to make sure that the children coming in are in that school district. So I don't think that the redrawing boundaries is going to do it. In fact, I frankly think it's a big waste of time. We should be focused on our deliverable product. What are we doing with our kids? What are our kids graduating at? What are they benefiting from our system? And I don't see where redrawing boundaries really does that. Engaging the community, there's a wealth of engagement opportunities in Portland, and many happy people willing to share their opinions, and that just needs to be funneled in a direction that we receive it and actually work with it. And I think that there is no shortage of willingness to give feedback on what's wrong with PPS, but there's a tremendous problem, again, in communication, receiving that, and actually doing something with it. So.
Thank you. Mr. Soderback?
Well, gee whiz. We can change your boundary, but don't change my boundary. I just got used to it over the last 50 years. So the criteria on which we divide up the pie here of high schools and the grade schools clustered around the high school. Maybe we need to do a little thinking there. This question has to do with getting away from a physical boundary and then going to some other kind. Race, for instance. I remember the last time, years and years ago, we had a problem. It was the same thing, don't go into North Portland and reboundary us out of the picture. We want to stay a community. So stuff is filtering down through the court on gerrymanders, and that goes with the physical boundaries. I really don't care about the physical boundaries. All I need to know is what school that I go to if I live in this. Supposedly they're all equal. maybe a different criteria for drawing boundaries would be appropriate.
Ms. Kohnstamm?
Thank you. I do agree that we have work to do in terms of our boundaries because we need to do some enrollment balancing. We have schools that are overcrowded and we have schools that are very under-enrolled. That said, for a long time in this district, enrollment was the main driver for how schools were resourced and what kinds of programs were offered in those schools, and that can't be the only criterion. That can't be the most important thing. We need to assure that every child in every school, has access to the same quality education, the same type of career technical offerings, the same arts and electives, regardless of enrollment. But we do have work to do in terms of balancing our enrollment. And frankly, historically, the school board hasn't had much of an appetite to make the really tough decisions because Portlanders' love of our neighborhood schools is both a blessing and a curse. People are very attached to their neighborhood schools. But we do need to be able to make some change and always have kids at the center of those decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz, you'll start us on this one.
All right.
What are your positions on language education, I said that wrong, language instruction at the programmatic level? How should school instruction be structured to meet the needs of English language learners?
I'm not an authority on this one. English speaker. I learned some Spanish and kind of dabble with it, so I'm not really an authority on this. I know that Marysville, the school nearest my home, has something to the effect of 40 different languages spoken there, and it's a tremendous challenge to handle that many different languages. I don't have a good answer for that. I wouldn't presume to be an authority, and I would, frankly, as a school board member, would want to have some authorities come speak on this. Authorities from those communities that are having that issue and educators that have resolved that issue. That's the best I got for you.
Mr. Soderback?
Oh,
Oh,
repeat the question.
sure. What are your positions on language instruction at the programmatic level? How should school instruction be structured to meet the needs of English language learners?
Well, I'm not aware that our English-speaking students are having a special time with English any more than we all have. They keep changing the language on us all the time, so we got to keep up on it. Now, as far as foreign languages, why don't we have Swedish? All the way through college, the limit of foreign language, you say, well, let's see, everybody will have two languages. That means we'll have English and we'll have Spanish. Well, I think two very nice languages, but we just can't encompass every language, every dialect, and hope to all get to the finish line, to the graduation at the same time. We have programs for non-English speaking to catch up. I have no idea if they work or not. Like I say, I'm not aware that our English-speaking students are having a particular time with English.
Ms. Kohnstamm?
So this is an area of real concern for me in Portland Public Schools. It's an area of challenge for all big school districts where you have students speaking 50 different languages in a given school, including dialects that aren't spoken by very many other students in the school and the city. And it's also an area where Portland Public Schools has historically really not served our kids well. And I would say, particularly with the older English language learners, our rate of graduating kids out of English language instruction, English as a second language instruction, is slow. It's way too slow. And we do have some new leaders in this area who are bringing some urgency and focus to how do we progress our students much more quickly into the general education setting. So this is something that I'm hopeful about. We also know that our dual language immersion programs are really good vehicles for both native English speakers to learn a second language, but also the best way for native speakers to gained proficiency in both languages. So the district has been adding those programs, and I hope can continue to do so. It's always a struggle with funding. In my universe of fully funded schools, I would like to see all kids have an opportunity to learn a second language at every grade level.
Ms. Mayer?
Well, I'm going to speak from an educator's standpoint because I taught for a while in Florida, where there are many immigrants who come to work in the groves, basically, in the orange groves. And we didn't have a way to teach them English before they were just put into the classroom. To try to understand a subject area that they had no vocabulary for. So it's really important, I think, that kids get a fairly good grasp of English before they're put into programs where they're expected to learn at the same rate as everybody else who speaks a language. So it's a frustrating situation, I know, because we are under so much pressure to graduate everybody on time and that kind of thing. But when you have these kind of circumstances, it's going to take longer. And we just have to recognize that and accommodate kids according to their needs. And little kids who are just coming into school have different needs than the older kids do, so we need to recognize what those are and accommodate them the best we can.
Thank you. Time for a new question. Mr. Soderback, you're going to start us on this one, and it's a nice one for 90 seconds, I'll warn you. Despite talk in the state legislature of additional funds for schools, at this point, schools are looking at constrained budgets. How will you prioritize programs such as class size, talent and gifted programs, ESL, special education, equity, after-school programs, etc., etc.?
Is that all?
That's all.
Well, I'm running for the school board to represent the public, not the public who are taxpayers who pay for this. The board spends a lot of time on stuff it shouldn't. We have professionals that's 6 years or more higher ed, and we pay them good money. Now, if they can't figure it out, maybe we ought to change the system or change the people. The board does not have time to sit down and micromanage every student that goes through. There's just 70 schools to deal with. The board, doesn't get paid anything. Maybe meets once a week. We're not going to solve all these problems. But what we can do, we can say, well, wait a minute, maybe we ought to ease up on the financing here. We just have to stay within our budgets.
Ms. Kohnstamm?
Do you mind reading the whole question again, please?
Oh, sure. Let's see. All right, so the first half is that we know there's no more money. And then the second half
Basically.
Shorten that one. How will you prioritize programs such as class size, talented and gifted programs, ESL, special education, equity, after-school programs, etc.?
Yeah. So first, I have to push back on the first part because I think we all need to continue to keep advocating for more money. I have been engaged with every legislative session since our oldest son was in kindergarten in 2002, trying to advocate for more education funding. I think it's, somewhat hopeful that we might see some tax reform in this session, but we know it's not enough. It's not nearly enough to get us to the quality education model, which is what our students deserve. So it is a terrible process to see the district develop a budget and make these priorities when there's totally insufficient funding. So again, we need to really focus on the needs of the individual child in the classroom and work out from there in terms of what our priorities are. So make sure that we're investing in social emotional supports for kids, make sure that we're investing in electives and the things that are really engaging, particularly for our middle school and high school kids, and that help them find their passion and figure out what they want to do with their precious life. We need to invest in the professional development of our educators so that they feel supported and they continue to grow in their profession, and they continue to, be able to meet the needs of their every single unique student in their classroom. So they're really difficult choices, but they always have to start with the kids at the center.
Thank you. Ms. Mayer?
Okay. I've been to so many rallies and programs and presentations in the last 10 years since I moved here related to funding our public schools adequately. Just one last night in Pioneer Square. So the Oregon Center for Public Policy has a great presentation on how we got into this mess. And if you haven't seen it and you want to know, I suggest that you see that because it's really good. But the solution is to fully fund our public schools, asking the board to make cuts and prioritize year after year after year is just, it's not sustainable if we want kids to have a decent education. So this is what I'd like to see. I'd like to see after this session is over, I'd like to see the legislature call a special session, just like they do for giving tax breaks to Nike and Intel and all the other businesses. And I would like to see them say, we made a mistake. We underfunded education by about $2 billion, and we need to make that up. So my focus is to get the money that we need, that our kids deserve, and give them the quality education that they deserve, because this cutting of education funds to kids is just not acceptable.
Mr. Schultz?
What do I got, 90 seconds, right?
Yep.
So what's been happening hasn't been working. So yes, it's cyclic. We get these, we need to cut the budget, and then we go through budget cuts, and it's just not working. So I think fundamentally we need to be looking at what that process looks like. Are we cutting from the top down and holding standards to our administrative staff that are high or mediocre? And are we into our teachers and battling with unions? Those are realistic things that we have to consider when it comes to the funding for school. And the prioritizing of programs kind of goes with what is working. What's can we adopt system-wide that's working? What is serving a niche that is vital to that niche to thrive and survive? I think partnerships are an incredible part of that. The partnership with PCC to get kids out of the high school into the college and get onto college credits is a way that we can kind of take some of the burden off of the mainstream system and get it into some of these alternative systems. I think this is a citywide issue. Everybody in the city should be worried about our youth not having funds to get through school. That's kind of a big deal when you think about what they're not doing, what they're doing if they're not in school. Oftentimes they're graffiti, and I mean, not that every kid does this, but they're out doing graffiti and they find a crime family and they find education on the street. We don't want that. We want them educated in our schools so they're contributing members of our city. So I think that focusing and framing things on bringing everybody together citywide, statewide on this issue is where the answer lies, and looking honestly at the budget from top down.
Thank you. Let's start for another question. Ms. Kohnstamm, the schools have seen a huge increase in the need for mental health specialists. Teachers, building administrators, and parents have asked for more mental health supports for their students struggling with mental health issues and substance use disorders. What actions will you take to provide these needed services?
Well, this relates back to the question that you just asked in terms of making really difficult choices about how to spend our limited resources. And so there's no question, we hear from our educators and our principals every day about the mental health needs in our schools, starting with kindergarten. And part of that is we need to fund early childhood education so kids get the supports that they need before they show up at kindergarten. And then we need to form much stronger partnerships with our, partners in the community, nonprofits, city and county. Back to Mr. Schultz's point that our whole community should be concerned about the health and welfare of our students. And this is not just a problem and a challenge that exists between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. within the walls of our schools. This is our future. This is our community. And I think within the next 4 years, if I'm elected to the board, one of the things that I want to work on most intently is really strengthening those partnerships and holding the rest of our community accountable for supporting our young people and really developing some strong programs around how we can wrap our arms around them. Other large cities do it. Other school districts have much greater investment from their community in these type of programs, and there's no reason that Portland shouldn't.
Ms. Mayer?
I think we have to look at the cause too of this mental health crisis that we seem to be having. If you paid attention to crisis in the classroom and the disruption that are going on, you have to ask yourself, why is this happening? This really is not normal when we see little kids screaming and throwing furniture across the room. This is not normal. So and other things, another thing that has changed in our society too is we have a proliferation of Wi-Fi and screen devices and cell phones and laptops and tablets for our kids. And we have to recognize that these are radiation emitting devices. And there are lots of studies out there that say that these affect kids' health and they affect kids' brains. And I know it's not something that parents want to recognize because we love our devices so much and we depend on them now, like they're like an appendage. But we have to look deeper to see what the causes are, because this is not a normal thing. I've taught or been in education for over 40 years, and for this just to happen like it is, we have to find an explanation of why this is happening.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz?
Mental health specialists and substance use in the classroom, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so the Wii, the Switch, the Xbox, the iPad, YouTube, these are the things that are impacting our youth, and in my opinion, are what are impacting our classrooms. You have kids at home that are very detached from doing things together and outdoors, and they go to a classroom and try to sit in rows and be respectful of others when they don't interact with them regularly. This weekend I'll be camping with the Scouts. We're going to have about 200 people with most of our youth out in the woods away from all that stuff. And it has a huge impact when you see these kids go into that environment. They come with tensions. They want to be on their devices. And when they come out of it, they're happy, they're singing, they're talking, they're engaging. We're seeing that in our classrooms as a byproduct of our society, and it goes back to the point, this is a citywide issue. This is how we're raising our youth. This is our expectations of our youth, and what we're doing in classrooms is kind of like taking somebody who has an education degree to teach math and say, and you're also going to deal with the emotional issues present and the societal issues present in this youth that have families living in cars, that are drug addicts themselves, that are passing that along generationally. So this is a huge thing that trying to say the school has an answer to is a little naive. The school being a part of it is absolutely on point, and I think that should be the direction we head, is being a part of the solution and bringing in other agency, again, partnerships in the community. So,
Mr. Soderback?
Mental health. If we could do something, I suspect we would have done it by now. But there really isn't any cure for mental health problems other than some experiments and, of course, drugs. You just get these drugs that just put you in a different world, makes you very obedient, and say, gee, we've solved the problem here. Well, you know, I spent 20 years of my life taking care of 3 people that had mental problems, and I know less now after 20 years of doing this. Is around the clock every day for 20 years, and I wish I could tell you the magic pill to take and what. There just isn't. It's like the clock was turned back 50 years, you know. We used to capture people, throw them in the loony bin, and that got rid of them. Today we don't do that. We get 2 doctors to sign a paper and then send you off to the special school. So the problem here is not going to be solved within the school district on mental health. The mental health people are going to have to do something if they can.
Thank you. New question. Ms. Mayer, you going to start us off? Is closing the educational opportunity gap more important than measuring the achievement gap? If so, would you support a 2-year pause on administering smarter, balanced testing to save money and redirect testing time to instructional time?
I would do more than support a 2-year moratorium on the SBAC. I would get rid of the SBAC altogether. And I would also get rid of a lot of other tests that students are required to take that don't add anything to, they don't inform instruction. The test should inform instruction. And these standardized tests, which have pretty high stakes attached to them, don't do that. And what we need to focus on, instead of testing, a testing regime, is to make school a place where kids want to be. And we can't do that if we're testing them all the time. If we recognize kids' strengths and teach to their strengths instead of hammering away on their weaknesses all the time, kids will want to be at school. So we have a choice. We can keep testing, and believe me, there are more tests on the way. This year, Portland Public Schools added the MAPS test. And that is the test that Jesse Hagopian in Seattle won a national prominence for getting rid of that test in Seattle, and now we're adopting it. That just doesn't make sense. So we need to stop the testing and start teaching.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz.
Could you give me that one again?
Sure. Is closing the educational opportunity gap more important than measuring the achievement gap? If so, would you support a 2-year pause on administering the smarter, balanced testing to save money and redirect testing time to instructional time?
So I think ours as a school board is to recognize if the smarter balance isn't working, then get rid of it. Why wait 2 years? That just seems like a waste of everyone's time. If you think it's not effective and another model should be working better, then get rid of one in favor of another. I'm not a fan of testing to evaluate young minds in scouting, not offering an endorsement of scouting or not, but you don't say, hey, show me which knot is tied correctly. You say tie the knot. And in doing so, they're demonstrating their skill and their capacity to tie the knot, and sometimes they need a little help situationally. Hey, it's going to tie a tarp down or something like that to motivate them. That kind of evaluation is not present in Oak's test or the current iteration of testing. It's very ABC, and it's not effective, in my opinion, of really measuring the classroom dynamic, the educated mind, the teacher's capacity. I think it's unfair. That said, we need something. We have to have something there, and I don't have an answer to that. It's not been my perspective to see what those answers might be. And there's people out there, thinkers, coming up with a solution to things like this that we're not listening to or hearing about on the larger landscape, and they need to be vetted and heard. Charter schools do an amazing thing. They try things, and getting their charter programs into mainstream is a big obstacle that doesn't seem to be overcome very often. I think things like that are where we can find answers to this kind of question.
Mr. Soderback?
Well, I'm not familiar with a specific test, but, testing is a way of life, and we're going to have to get used to it. To those, it's new to you. My whole life I took tests. I had to take my 6 years in the Navy. I had to take tests. And 30 years in the Merchant Marine, I had to take tests. And the only way, and I use these examples because whether I knew how to do it or not, others' lives depended on it. So we probably don't, we sort of have that in the schools. We got to, these students' lives depend upon it. We need to know what's going in the brain so we can, so the student can benefit from it. If they're not, we're going to have to change the curriculum. That's all there is to it. Whether it's like this, it's just probably you shouldn't suspend, arbitrarily suspend a 2-year testing program just to save money. You'd have to justify it by something other criteria than money.
Ms. Kohnstamm?
So to answer your question, is closing the opportunity gap more important than measuring the achievement gap? Absolutely. I mean, testing should only be a way to see where our kids are and how teachers can adjust to meet their individual needs. Testing is only useful as far as it helps the teacher adapt to the needs of every student in the classroom. It is also useful as a system to be able to see how are our schools doing. That's important. But again, the testing should be done in a way that really is useful to the kids and shows progress over time and allows the teachers to modify their practice. It helps the system help the teachers as well, provide supports for how to change their instructional practices. So right now, SBAC is the law of the land in the state of Oregon. I think I would welcome a conversation in the state around what should we be looking at in terms of being able to assess our students and measure our schools relative to one another. I think that would probably be a fruitful conversation for the state of Oregon to have.
And thank you. As always, there are many more questions than we have time for, but I'd like to now turn to our closing section. And Mr. Schultz, you'll start us off with your closing comment, please.
All right, closing comment. So I talked about partnerships, and I didn't recognize the robotics is a program that is found in a lot of schools that's not really part of the school, and it doesn't give the students involved with the robotics teams any academic credit. It's a travesty, because it's another way to partner with a parent and community-sponsored activity and get those kids some grade and recognition for that. Ultimate Frisbee, the creators game, commonly known as lacrosse, like those are things that are great PE things. They're club activities. And I get that Portland Public School has a budget issue, so they can't necessarily put in their curriculum, but they could certainly partner with some of these leagues and say, hey, we want to have this be a accredited program. We want to have kids taking attendance. And it's just another way to do a partnership that's creative, that doesn't hurt anybody and uses existing things to, that 1 minute thing's going to kill me. At any rate, my goal to join the board is to offer this kind of thinking, is to offer this perspective as a parent and a person that's very invested in my community. So.
Mr. Soderback?
The reason that I'm running for this office is sort of an end of a process that I started 10 years ago. When I read in the paper that we were closing 3 high schools. And went out to find out what was going on, especially my high school was getting closed. Been there 100 years, you know, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go down there and take one last cruise through there. And I really got a, you know, the world's changed, and we've got to change with it. It's entirely different from when I went to school, when you went to school. We've got to somehow cut down and focus on what really counts.
And Ms. Kohnstamm?
So as a parent volunteer and community activist, it has really been my honor to advocate for the students and families of Portland Public Schools in the last 4 years, to connect with so many different families and their experiences. It's difficult in the sense that we do see kids and families who are not being well served, and this is really why I want to continue in this role. We have a lot of work to do in terms of meeting the individual needs of every kid in every classroom. I'm optimistic about the progress that we can make in the next 4 years, but I do think that strong board leadership is really important. It's also really important in terms of the financial management and stewardship, especially at this time. We have significant challenges with our bond-funded work in this climate of huge escalation for construction. So these are issues that are going to require great attention, and I would be honored to continue to serve our kids in this role.
Ms. Mayer?
So a few weeks ago, I was giving testimony for about the umpteenth time, sitting at that table right there, when it occurred to me mid-sentence that I should be on this side instead of that side. So I decided to start thinking about running for school board. Because people often say to me, what's wrong with our schools? Our schools are broken, and I want to help fix them, but I don't know what to do. So I say to them that I have a pretty good idea of why our schools are broken, and I have some pretty good ideas of how to fix them, and I think you probably do too. So we should talk about it. That's a conversation worth having. So I plan to run an educational campaign because there's a lot to know about healing our schools. I'll be posting events on my Facebook page, so you can check it out and come and learn about how we can all work together to make Portland Public Schools a great school system.
Thank you. And my thanks to all the candidates for your work tonight, as well as your willingness to run for these offices. My thanks to the audience for your questions. I know that we had a brief period of time, but you all know how to find these candidates to ask them more questions besides our time together. We're now going to take a short 5-minute break so that we can get ready for the next panel. The water and restrooms are right out there for those of you right here, and I'll see you again shortly. Thank you. Welcome back to our second half of our panel for the Public School Board. Again, this is an evening for civil discourse, a focus on the topics and the issues facing the public schools. Again, please do not use an image or recording device during the forum. Turn off your phones and other electronic devices. Please hold your applause till the end because all of that takes time. Those of you in the audience here, please feel free to ask questions. You can use the 3x5 cards and pass them to my whole panel of 4 behind me. Very exciting. Anyway, seated in front of us are Michelle DePass and Shanice Brittany Clarke, who are from Zone 2. In Zone 1, we have Andrew Scott. In each case, for Zone 1 and for Zone 2, the other candidates have withdrawn. And I also should remind all of you that although these candidates are running in a zone, we get to elect all of them. All right, so feel free to continue to listen to them with that in mind. Okay. As I've explained to them, we will start as Mr. Scott and keep going in a circle, if you will, so that each candidate will have a chance to address each answer. They will have 1.5 minutes for each question and 1 minute for an opening and 1 minute for a closing. So we're ready. No, we also have a timekeeper who will give a 15-second warning and then a stop. So, sorry, you're seated differently than my script. However, I know, that's terrible. Mr. Scott, would you get us started, please?
Great. Thank you very much. And I want to thank the PTA and the League of Women Voters, and I particularly want to give a shout out to the Bus Project. I was actually a Bus Project board member from 2004 through 2011 and a treasurer during that period of time. So great organization, and I really support, and I'm glad you're putting together this forum so we have a chance to talk a little bit about why we're running, which I will get to, and I've probably already used 30 seconds. I'm running for school board as a product of Portland Public Schools and also as a parent of two students in Portland Public Schools. I benefited from having quality schools, stable funding, and really great teachers. But it's really clear to me, watching over the last few years, actually the last couple decades, that that's not true of every student within Portland Public Schools. And I've also been really frustrated by the condition of the schools, by the broken relationship between the district and its teachers, and those unequal outcomes that we see in our students throughout the district. I also think there are some reasons for optimism, and I think there will be a chance to talk about some of those in some of the questions later. But I think it's really important that we have a board that asks good questions, that makes really good decisions, and demands results from the superintendent and the district so we can start solving some of these issues. I am optimistic because I think PPS can be a world-class district. Thank you.
Ms. DePass, your opening?
Okay, thank you. Thanks to the sponsors of the forum for the opportunity to share my background and my vision with community members. Thanks for everyone for being here. I'm Michelle DePass. I'm here to introduce myself and ask for your support. I'm a Portland native, a PPS grad, and a PPS mom. I'm invested in this community and the quality education our students deserve. As a 25-year volunteer in the classrooms, I have taught business basics to 5th and 8th graders in inner Northeast Portland schools, led outdoor recreation for low-income youth, facilitated Girl Scouts Beyond Bars at Coffee Creek Correctional, taught algebra to formerly incarcerated youth so they could get into pre-apprenticeships programs, and of course, I volunteered quite readily in my kids' classrooms. The district is facing serious challenges, including the historic and persistent achievement gap between white kids and kids of color, and I know we can do better. We also know there are strategies that we can adopt to close this gap. Our district needs to commit itself to becoming more diverse. We need to fully implement ethnic studies, and we need to decrease the disproportionate rate of disciplinary incidents that creates a school-to-prison pipeline. Thank you.
Ms. Clarke?
Greetings, y'all. I'm Shanice Brittany Clarke, and I'm running for PPS Zone 2. I'm an educator, progressive community organizer, and advocate for students. I deeply care about students, their families, and education professionals. After getting a postgraduate education and educational leadership, I've also understood that students and community members are also experts in determining indicators for student learning and success. My folks are from Jamaica and immigrated here, and we had a really tough time and struggled with hardships, and my experience with high school was really displaced and disrupted. And I know that Portland students have similar experiences, with 76% of folks dropping out from PPS coming from low-income families. So wraparound services, restorative discipline practice, and just strong retention efforts for teachers and staff are things I will advocate for, which will close and help move towards solving our achievement gap.
Thank you. Okay, we go to our first question. Ms. DePass. Whoops, lost it. Here we go. Approximately how many Portland Public Schools school board meetings have you attended?
It's going to be very approximate. Probably about 16. And that would be mostly when my children were in elementary school in the years 2003 through, actually I still have a kid in school. So the last board meeting I attended was last year.
Ms. Clarke?
I have been regularly attending PPS board meetings for the last few months off and on. So if I were to give a estimated number, I'd probably have attended 10.
Okay, and Mr. Scott?
I've attended 2 this year. I've watched a few more online, and years ago I've attended a couple as well. And one of the things I will say is that I think it's really important that the board ensure that those meetings are accessible and that there's a lot of time for comment, and that also that the board focuses really clearly on some of the key issues. I think one of the things that parents that I've talked to get frustrated by is coming to those board meetings and the length of time they go on some of the less important issues rather than focusing on some of the really key issues that I think are important for the success of the district.
Thank you. Ms. Clarke, you'll start us on. What training or accountability requirements of student resource officers should be included in the memo of understanding between PPS and the Portland Police Bureau to ensure that officers do not engage in racial profiling?
Thank you for that.
You're okay?
Thank you for that question. I will start by saying I know Black students in particular and students of color are disproportionately impacted by police and are harmed. And I know as an educator that it only disrupts and furthers the struggles of students that come up. So the things in a memorandum of understanding, in the event that that is something that we pursue as a district, I would want to encourage students, families, and community members, educators to all be able to talk about what safety needs that they have in particular and have that be executed through how we build and develop that relationship. And I would love to see community building be a strong part of what we foster and value in that. And in addition to that, thinking about mechanisms or things like training community and programs that are aimed in de-escalation and trust building. So I know as a part of Opal Environmental Justice, which I sit on a board for, we're supporting an alternative to policing on the MAX and on the buses. And that involves training folks in de-escalation and giving them the tools. My minute is up, but I would just say I would advocate for full transparent participation from all parties, not just the folks who are signing the dotted line, in addition to advocating for alternative options.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
So I think before we go down the road of signing a memorandum of understanding, it's really important to do more engagement with our community, with our students. One of the key responsibilities of the district is to keep students safe. But part of that is also making sure that our students feel safe. And a number of our students, particularly our Black and brown students, don't feel safe around Portland police. And that's a larger issue in our community and our society that needs to be addressed. I think that there are some potential options and alternatives. The city has created a new community service officer position. These are unarmed, but DPSST trained officers. I think that's a potential opportunity to bring into the schools. But I think the most important thing I want to do is hear from the students in terms of what they want to see. We've talked for decades about community policing, and I think this is a place community policing can really start in earnest. If we can develop those relationships between school resource officers, whether they're armed, whether they're unarmed, whether they're Port Department police or something else altogether, making sure they establish that relationship, that first name relationship with students in the school, so that they are really trying to solve problems and that they're not contributing to the school to prison pipeline, I think is really important.
Ms. DePass?
Thank you. So what Shanice said about engaging the community and the full range of stakeholders in that conversation is really important. One of the tenets of public engagement is that you want to identify your universe of stakeholders, and the stakeholders that are most impacted by any decision made, especially by a public entity, need to be at the table when those decisions are being made. I'm curious, I would like to see a conversation also happening around who's entitled to comfort and safety in the schools. We know that it's not black and brown children. And so, you know, as a black mom, my idea of safety and comfort is not having an armed resource officer in the schools. That's probably different for every parent. But yeah, if we're going to go down the road of developing an MOU, there needs to be broad public engagement. We need to talk to the people that are in gang-affected families, people from places like the Portland Opportunities Industrial Center, Rosemary Anderson High School, and some of these really hard-to-reach communities that are impacted by tangling with police and are already in or have been in the criminal justice system. I think it's important to bring those voices.
Thank you. New question, Mr. Scott, you can start us off on how can we best support English as a second language students in our schools?
I was waiting for a second part of that question. I think we can
purposely shortened it. I'm sorry.
I think we can best support by providing the language education that they need and meeting them where they are. You know, there was an earlier question on the first panel around this, and I agreed with a number of the answers. I mean, it's really important that we figure out what our ESL learners need, and that we're willing to provide the resources to meet that. And whether it's teaching in their native language while they learn English, whether it's other forms of English language learning, I think is going to be up to, and it's going to depend on the individual students. And I think we need to be flexible in terms of what we're providing to those students.
Thank you, Ms. DePass.
A couple times in my life, I was a Spanish as a second language learner in Venezuela and in Guadalajara, Mexico. And both of the programs I attended were dual language, so both languages, English and Spanish was used. I like the idea of bringing English speakers on. In terms of teaching our multiple new Portlanders, catching them up to their grade level is really important. I do a lot of work in East Portland, and there are 74 languages being spoken in some of those schools. And it's our challenge and opportunity to bring those people up through a strong ESL language program.
Thank you, Ms. Clarke.
I definitely think that the dual language immersion program that's currently in PPS is an excellent tool, and having the opportunity for folks to experience the education system in their own language, in their in their mother tongue, I think is critical, and ways to connect that with our curricular goals is important. So I think investing in those spaces and prioritizing those spaces for English language learners is important. And also having the tools for educators to differentiate their instruction is also a critical part of being able to meet folks where they're at and catch them up. I also think some things that were already mentioned, having grace and more time to graduate, and just spending more intentional time with students, and having sets of policies that are different for those folks is important. And I'm a huge advocate for peer tutoring programs, and I think if we invest in peer tutoring for those populations, we will see them getting that one-on-one time that can help them get an extra leg up.
Thank you. New question, Ms. DePass, start us. A high school diploma should mean that a child has the tools necessary to be a successful member of society. Explain how schools might be improved to ensure graduates are truly career or college ready.
That's a great question. I have two kids, both at Benson High School. One's graduated, and one I feel is prepared for college, and the other one is not. And there's lots of factors that go into that. It's very important to prepare our kids. I know that at the PCC level, we're seeing a lot of kids from Portland Public coming into the PCC system that aren't quite ready to do the college level work that's important. I believe that our teachers need support in order to get those students where they're at. And I don't think it's a matter of necessarily testing. I think it's really important for kids to have lots of different experiences besides academic to help them become well-rounded college students or prepare them for their careers. Subjects such as recess, art, music, things that we're sorely lacking in many of the schools, are a really important component of becoming a well-rounded citizen. I'm sorry, I'm losing the question a little bit, but it was about high school graduation and what we can do better to improve the outcomes.
Right.
Instructional time goes a long ways in getting kids the time and the days that they need to get through the curriculum.
Great. Ms. Clarke?
I definitely believe proper investment in the resources that teachers have are going to lead towards folks having more access to the things that they need, and culturally responsive pedagogy and curriculum, things that help students see themselves reflected, affirmed, and see themselves in curriculum is important. And a piece of that is looking at the lived experiences of students and the things that are impacting them directly, and incorporating that into instruction. So I know teachers are definitely invested in seeing more tools to motivate students in the classroom. So a teacher at Cesar Chavez and other folks in their community have talked about the idea of having one day of the week or Friday where you think about a different subject or area that can connect to your Common Core or the curriculum that you're working on, aviation, firefighting, and just exploring different things for folks to be more motivated and present in schools. And I think investing in technical education and educational opportunities that expand beyond what is in front of students so they can think globally and think about how to be contributing members of society is absolutely a way that we do that.
Mr. Scott?
Great. I think the question's really highlighting the idea that graduation rates and focus on graduation rates is not enough. It's an important measure, but we really need to make sure that the students who are graduating are having success afterwards and after graduation. And that's just as important as increasing the graduation rate. And I think one of the ways we can do that is by providing multiple paths to graduation. And so as both Michelle and Shanice have mentioned, I mean, this is having college prep classes for kids that go in that direction. It's having vocational and technical education for kids going into the workforce. It's partnering with local communities to figure out what is needed and what are the career pathways for students as they leave high school, and making sure we've got apprenticeships and we've got training programs and some of those connections. But it's really incumbent on the schools not just to make sure kids graduate, but to make sure they're successful afterwards as well.
Thank you. And Ms. Clarke will start a new question. A student has complained that issues are silenced at school. What will you do to have open communication and build trust between the administration and students?
That's an excellent question. I think having open, transparent, and fluid processes as they relate to discipline and reporting incidents that happen in the classroom is imperative. And I think teachers who are advocating for students and students who are able to advocate for themselves, I would also add to this question or this conversation and thinking about what are the conditions to build safety and security for our folks in schools. And I think that means looking at our systems, our administrative processes for reporting, and making sure that there isn't room for retaliation, that there is room for thinking about how to have a holistic response and approach to student needs. So that means thinking about resources that the schools within PPS might have or have to offer us. I know our Sun community schools have more of a restorative and wraparound approach to delivering for students. So I think connecting our lens and philosophy that we apply in those spaces to all of our schools will help with implementing those sound processes that people feel safe utilizing, and making sure that the results are accountable and transparent.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Could you read the question one more time?
Sure. Second. Student complains that issues are silenced at school. What will you do to have open communication and build trust between the administration and students?
It's a good question. We have to, and when I say we, I mean the board and the district and the community at large, have to make sure we're listening to students. We have to make sure we give them opportunities to communicate with us. There's a student member on the board. I think that's important, so that there's a student voice at all of the board meetings. I think there are also, we need to make sure that we're encouraging the district to have open communication between the administration and students, and every school should have that. I think it would be interesting to potentially have board meetings at high schools where we specifically go and we have a forum there where we're conducting a regular meeting, but giving them an opportunity to speak to us and tell us about what's going on in their schools as well. And the last point I would make, and I'm not just saying this because the bus project is in the room, but I would love to see 16-year-olds vote for Portland Public School Board members and actually have a real voice in terms of who's electing, who gets elected to the board to represent them.
Ms. DePass?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of audits and setting protocols in place. And when I send my kids to school, I want them to be safe, and I want them to feel safe reporting any incidents that they're uncomfortable with. That said, it'd be important to establish protocols in place where there's reporting. Reporting's not coming just to a single person, for instance. There are several people that reporting's coming back to. There's mechanisms in place to assure that there's no retaliation. There's a sense of safety, and it's a cultural issue that the leadership can establish a culture of that's not retaliatory or punitive, but rather believes students that come forward and has kind of a holistic way of listening to these questions that are silenced and having protocols in place for how we follow through on those. In other words, if somebody's coming forward and feels like they're being silenced, we need to have systems in place where they can come forward and that we've got a way for them to move through this healing process. In terms of building trust between the administration and the students, again, that's a cultural, this culture can be developed in each organization and at the district level. And it's up to the leaders, including the board members, to create that environment where people are able to be heard, be acknowledged, and be restored.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, new question. How familiar are you with various learning disabilities like ADHD and dyslexia? How well do you feel the Portland Public Schools are currently serving special education students?
So I think so there are challenges in terms of how we serve special education students, and I think there are a number of reports that show that in terms of the resources that are being allocated and also the outcomes for some of those students. Personally, I'm not familiar with those. In terms of I don't have personal experience with ADHD or in my family, but I think it's really incumbent on us to be asking those questions and to be listening to the educators in the district and experts from outside the district as well, who will provide advice and recommendations on what we should be doing as a district to best serve those students.
Sorry, Ms. DePass.
Thank you. I was hearing your question as two questions, really. One is about ADHD and attention deficit, and the other one is about special education. But can you repeat
Sure.
the exact question, please?
How familiar are you with various learning disabilities like ADHD and dyslexia? How well do you feel the Portland Public Schools are currently serving special education students?
And I'm not an expert at all. I have no lived experience with special ed. I have one of my children. We've gone back and forth about getting him into special ed. I have family members, so I'm just speaking from my own experience, family members, black family members that have been encouraged to be in special ed that now have master's degrees. And so in the case of my family, I know, I feel like my family was profiled somewhat. The people that were headed to special ed are actually are brilliant people. But I can't really answer because I don't know how well we're doing district-wide with special ed students.
Okay, Ms. Clarke.
I also do not have personal experience with a learning disability or ADHD, but I do know that I am in communication with parent advocacy groups, and actually was here last night with a talented and gifted advisory group. But I know that there's a number of challenges that folks have, and as we look at, speaking to Michelle's point too, these folks are usually, with the right support and the right people in place, are excelling in ways that are different from their peers. So I think meeting the needs of folks is important, and differentiating our class curriculum is important. So I know that's something that the district is currently working on, and I know the training talks about compliance, and then gives folks some tools to get out there and start doing the work and changes to their curriculum. But we definitely need more support. Class sizes are way too large. And there is a report that was recently released around rhetoric around what it means to have disruptions from students in classes. And ultimately, I think there are a lot of issues. There are too many to list. But I know I would be definitely invested in thinking about single subject and acceleration in a different way, and making that more accessible for folks. And I know currently folks are bused around to different clusters in schools if they have the opportunity to have an accelerated class. So I think there's issues of equity. I know that my time is up, but I wanted to just name that looking at the issues of equity with accessing those services that folks need are critical.
Thank you. New question, Ms. DePass. What criteria will you use to determine whether and how school boundaries should be redrawn, and how will you engage the community in the process?
Well, I work as a community engagement professional for the City of Portland Housing Bureau currently, and really reaching the hardest to reach populations with a degree of success. The boundary issue, as you know, everybody in the room knows, is very contentious. I live in a neighborhood that nobody wants to send their child to, and I sent my kids to that school. I live within a short car drive away from a very well-resourced school that everybody wants to send their kids to. And so it's a tough, I don't know if I could solve the problem right here and right now, but I look at this problem from an equity lens and also from an outcomes lens. As a student and grad of PPS, in the neighborhood that I grew up in did not afford me the opportunities that are available several neighborhoods over. And that's important, and that's still happening. So I'd like to see resources. If we're going to use the equity lens, we're going to put resources where they're the most needed, and that means the schools that have the worst outcomes.
Okay. Ms. Clarke?
Can you repeat the question so I respond to it
See,
directly?
here it is. What criteria will you use to determine whether and how school boundaries should be redrawn, and how will you engage the community in the process?
So when I think about criteria and engaging the community, the first thing that I always think about around these conversations are just the legacy and history of gentrification in Portland, and recognizing those impacts on PPS. I think the lens, using that racial equity lens, but diving deeper into the actual impacts of income, access, and housing are going to be critical factors. And also, I know Title I schools receive funding, so when we redraw our boundary lines, there might not be access to the same funding. So we need to think about all of those things when we do the process. And also thinking about diverse communities and low-income communities benefiting as they are needing to be centered a bit more in these processes. Some folks in the previous side of the panel were talking a little bit about this, but the balancing of classrooms. We have folks who are in crowded classrooms in some schools, and in our Title I schools and other places, we have very small classrooms. So I think thinking about those criteria is important, in balancing the resources that we have as a district so they benefit all and everybody has the same access to teachers who are proficient in the district for years and years, teaching math and other subjects, and having those.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Scott.
So boundary decisions are one of the hardest things that a school board does. And engagement with the public and transparency around that process is really, really critical. I think it's one of the things that's necessary because people move around within a city, and the best planning and the best demographics, you're still going to end up with unequal enrollment. And when you end up with unequal enrollment, you end up with unequal programs. And that's what we're seeing within PPS today. So although boundary decisions are hard, they're also really necessary. They also traditionally have been done in a very racist and discriminatory way. When I was growing up here, when I attended PPS, powerful West Side parents ensured that when boundaries were redrawn, they were redrawn to the advantage of their schools. I will pledge right here and right now that I am not going to do that if I get on the board. We need to apply an equity lens to boundary decisions, meaning that we need to always be focused on every decision helping the schools that are the lowest performing schools in the district. And we need to do that by bringing more students and more resources towards them. And politically, that may be challenging, although again, I'm going to revert back to a little bit of optimism that I do think we've come far enough in, and not far enough, I should say, but we've made enough progress in our equity conversations that I think even privileged parents such as myself recognize the need to rebalance the district in a way that provides opportunities for all students across the district equally.
Thank you. And Ms. Clarke, here's one of those great 90-second, I didn't do this on purpose, 90-second questions. Please explain your understanding of the Portland Public, excuse me, there's a word missing here. Please explain how the public schools are funded and how the board can influence the amount of funding that the public schools receive.
Thank you for that question. I know there is a mix of resources that the district utilizes. We get funding from the state. We use bond measures for capital projects and supporting, for example, Roosevelt being remodeled. And there are, I'm sorry, can you repeat the second part of that question?
How can the board influence the amount of funding that PPS receives?
Absolutely. So I think being engaged with legislators is important, and being at each legislative session and advocating for increased funding is important. I'm a member of a teachers union now, and we're heavily engaged with showing up to rallies, emailing our senators, going to different spaces that they'll be in, and reminding them what the true impacts are of decisions they're actively making. So I think that's a key and critical part of how districts survive as funding from the state. So that is a tool that I plan to use and just continue as I do that, as it impacts my own work as an educator.
Thank you. Mr. Scott.
So I've spent most of my career in public finance, and prior to my current job at Metro Regional Government, I was the city budget director for about 10 years. And so I have a pretty good grasp of property taxes locally and how those flow. And in addition to the things that Shanice talked about, in terms of the, influencing, having influence of the state, doing state advocacy with our legislators, a levy, which it's very important for the board to ensure that we renew the operating levy within the district, and also the bond and the next bond measure that's going to be coming up, which is really essential as well. I think in the long term, we need to be looking at property tax reform. And League of Oregon Cities has done a lot of work on this. School districts around the state have talked about different ways to approach this. There are no perfect solutions, but there are solutions that are a lot better than what we have today. And I don't want to put the audience to sleep by going into details of Measure 5 and property tax compression and how that impacts the tax base. But there are definitely ways we could reform taxes that would free up some of those property taxes and frankly allow districts such as Portland Portland, where I think the majority do want our schools to be better funded, restructure the property tax system in a way that would allow much more adequate and stable funding in the long run.
Ms. DePass?
Yeah, there's definitely some tension between what we pay in taxes and the impacts of Measure 5 across Portland. I agree. We need to lobby our legislators. We need to be at their meetings. We need to be in the spaces where they're convening. We need to. I saw Shanice at a rally yesterday wearing red, advocating for more funding for schools. The levy renewal, we need to make that happen again, and there's talk of an additional bond, construction bond, so we can continue the good work that's happening there. But I also agree that we need to have a conversation with taxpayers, because we're in the funding crunch that we're at where we are right now as a result of the tax of Measure 5, and we're going to have to as a community, decide to tax ourselves if we want to increase outcomes at the educational level.
Well, the time has gone by, maybe for you too, I hope. At any rate, since you're on the hot seat, Mr. Scott, start us with your closing, please.
Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity tonight to be here and talk a little about the school district and the school board and some of these key issues. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I am optimistic. I think that the district's at a really interesting turning point right now. There is a real focus on equity, but we need to make sure that we start seeing some results and that we have a way to measure those results and communicate that out to the public and the community. The bond program that's in place is pretty transformational, and has the potential over the next 30 years to rebuild or modernize every school within the district, but only if we maintain the public's trust in how we spend those bond dollars. I've run bond programs before. This is something that I know the right questions to ask to avoid some of the mistakes that I think have been made and maintain that public trust going forward. And finally, I'm optimistic about the long overdue increases in funding that might be coming from the state. But if we do get that funding, it's going to be really important that we're careful with it and that we budget sustainably so that we can get off the fiscal roller coaster and have some stability for our parents, for our students, and for our teachers in the district. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to you more.
Ms. DePass?
Yeah, I'm here also because I have reason to hope. HB 2019 is a proposal that will provide revenue for Oregon schools with investments in early learning, equity, safety, and social emotional supports, with districts able to make choices about how that money is spent. Also, Portland's one of 74 school districts participating in the Council of the Great City Schools. It's an advocacy organization that promises to deliver deep and sometimes sometimes difficult but meaningful work at the board level and administration level. I'm really excited about that. And finally, I think 3 things you should look for in a school board member. You should look for someone that's committed to children and to the community. Elect someone with experience and passion for doing the school board work, which is quite different from campaigning. And elect somebody that's got a proven record of accomplishments in Portland.
Thank you. And Ms. Clarke?
I currently do similar work as an education administrator, drafting policy that impacts things like Title IX, thinking about Black student success, response protocol to crisis, and thinking about relationships that we contract with. So as we think about doing those things in a way that's community-centered, in a way that always knows the pulse of how our main stakeholders, students, families, parents, community members, and educators are going to feel, I can bring that to the Portland Public School Board. And I know doing that in a way that builds community, in a way that centers students, is critical and important and will disrupt the status quo that we are seeing and lead to promising that all students get a good educational experience regardless of the things that they show up with or their zip code.
Thank you. And again, my thanks to the candidates for being here, for your thoughtful answers, and for, in fact, running for these offices. My thanks to the audience here, as well as those who participated electronically. Thanks also, I feel like I'm winning an Oscar, to the Portland Public Schools Multimedia Services for recording, all the volunteers for helping, and our partners, the League's partners, the Portland Council PTA and the Bus Project. Please check the Portland League of Women Voters website, LWVPDX, to view this forum. For more election information, pick up your nonpartisan voters guide, which for those of you in the audience are right outside, or go to your local library or go to vote411.org. Election Day is May 21st. As in all Oregon elections, you will receive a mail-in ballot. Ballots must be mailed back early or delivered to an official drop-off site anywhere in Oregon no later than 8 p.m. on Tuesday, May 20th. And I'll put a little pitch in here. For somebody who didn't grow up in Oregon, I don't understand why everybody just doesn't mail this thing in. However, you are informed, you've been here. Please share this information with others, and do remember that your vote, every vote, counts. Thank you and good night.